board side. I'm sorry, Frank, did you catch that? We got interrupted by that announcement.
Yes, that is true. We do give it a cursory review. We don't do a deep dive into it. One thing to note is that we are looking at making the procurement purchasing position, added support for some of this activities.
Okay. Joe, I have a question with respect to the internal service funds on page 12. Workers' compensation, obviously the majority of the negative net position is for long-term claims payable, but just looking at the change in net position of $48,387, does that reflect that the city did not fully cover current year expenses for workers' comp that were flowing through that internal service fund?
It definitely, this is on an accrual basis, so the change in liability could have generated some of that. Mm-hmm. So I'll look at the
okay.
The cash flow statement will be a better perspective on that, mm-hmm. and that should be Schedule 7. So again, it doesn't actually have a cash account, but more. I think the interfund went down slightly. So from a cash perspective, the 8952 that's down below in the reconciliation. Since that was a decrease in the due from, enough money was transferred in the current to cover current, which I think is the methodology the city currently uses to fund these, because obviously there isn't a lot of equity, so that they're more just funding it as claims incurred versus funding it based upon the projection of how to, whatever the estimate would be, just setting the premium at $3 million and putting in $3 million, and whatever happens, or just they're kind of recording the activity as it's paid.
Great. So it really is from a cash perspective, the revenues into the internal service fund are adequate to cover the current year expenses that are actually being charged to the internal service fund. And that's consistent for medical, general and workers' comp in terms of just P&L, in and out, inflows, outflows. They are at least covering current year costs.
Right. I mean, most of that is funded from the general fund and Allentown and that type of thing. So,
yep.
Yeah, they're just funding it exactly at what they need to fund it to pay the expense versus having the ability to put in more than they need to fund current year activity.
Okay. I asked that because sometimes, that it is not a sound practice to not cover current year, and it can get lost in the details. That is one of the ways that Hartford got itself into trouble. So I'm glad to hear that we don't have that going on. I'm going to hold on the rest of my questions so I can open up to my colleagues. Any other questions?
Bob White. If I understand the presentation, that the prior period adjustment of whatever it is, 3.2 of that is from the Board of Ed, and is most of that the kind of shifting from the year that having one year's expenses not recorded for that year, but in the following year?
Yeah, so it's the timing of, and
yeah.
The biggest piece of that is tuition and transportation, because those are the biggest numbers.
Okay, wherever it comes from. And I guess my question is, and I'm obviously not an accountant. If you've got this shifting and the prior period adjustment is created as a result of moving a 2020 expense to 2019, is that going to have a favorable effect on 2020, such that at least part of the adjustment will be made up?
It shouldn't, because if the numbers are exactly the same, this 3.2 million that was recorded that we pushed back from 20 to 19 will leave the room in the budget to make sure that the cutoff is done correctly for 2020. So unfortunately, this is just settling up. There's not going to be any gain at all from this.
And this is Melissa. Otherwise stated, if it was not corrected, we should have ended up with 13 months of activity in fiscal 20, creating a deficit.
Right.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Obviously, the what to do about this is a separate topic for another time. Okay. Thank you.
Questions from any other members? I will jump in with a couple more questions. On slide 13, can you just talk a little bit about the change in net position for the city police pension fund?
All right, so that would be the details on page 78 in the audit. 79 is the operations. So the decrease is, the city is making the recommended contribution. It's just the benefit costs. They were only up 283,000, but that had a negative impact because if you look at the change in fair value last year was.
I see. So the issue here is that the level of benefits that are going out is greater than the combination of the contributions from the employee and the members and the investment income that was generated for the year. So that is then must be largely attributable to not achieving the 6.75, I think you mentioned, investment rate of return.
For Allentown, Allentown shows positive operations, but the city is on point over six years. Just for the current year, they were at 3.95 versus projection at 7.125. So, that will affect the contribution going forward.
Got it. Okay, very good.
It's pretty tight as far as how much income it's generating, or at least generated in 19.
And I guess for the board, since Joe has pointed us to that particular exhibit in the financials, the extent to which the economy is moving in a not so favorable direction, when you look at how much we rely on investment return to meet disbursements, we could see impact of future ADEC increases, obviously, to make up for what we're not gaining in investment return to offset those disbursements that come out. So as we think about future multi-year plans, something to just footnote for our thoughts. My next question was on OPEB on slide number 17. And this question was for Frank. Can you remind the committee as to how much is budgeted for OPEB in fiscal 20? And just curious if any of the contracts that were recently negotiated, did they include any provisions where the employees contribute to OPEB costs?
The current year budget has $50,000 as the initial OPEB trust entry. Fiscal 21 would be an additional $75,000. And as far as I know right now, none of the contracts have any employee contributions going towards OPEB.
Okay, very good. something to think about for future contracts. The state has done so with all of our union contracts. That's just an FYI. That concludes my. Go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing to note. You had mentioned concern regarding the pension. The police pension valuation that was completed for current year, fiscal 21, we actually did have them ratchet back the expectation on the discount rate.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions or comments with respect to the financials for June 30th, 2019? Ms. Tennyson, do you have anything that you want to just share with the committee in terms of your work with West Haven on addressing some of the findings?
Can I interject something?
Yes.
This is Steve Felsigno. At some point, especially with what's going on in the world, with the investment world, I think you have to do, at this point, especially looking at the pension fund information on page 16, which is not favorable, especially for the Allentown area. I think you have to do kind of an acid test and a stress test with realistic figures that could possibly happen this year to see where you're at and to see where you're going, so you can possibly maybe adjust quicker to what you're doing, because we've been told for many months that some of these pension funds are going to be in trouble in the short term, especially Allentown, and I think that is going to change drastically with what's going on in the world right now.
Steve, I think that's a very fair point, and with a 26% funded ratio, it would be good to know if, the extent, if we're at all putting at risk our ability to meet disbursements. We should really be looking at that over a period of time. I think, Bob, you've asked on a couple of occasions for a kind of cash projection, a forward projection as to when this becomes materially problematic. So we should probably add that to the list for the actuaries. Very good point.
The other thing I want to bring up is, after looking at and listening to and reading through this summary, a lot of the things that they're talking about, I mean, you're talking about the Board of Education being $500,000 over. I want to know if they fixed any of the problems materially that we were notified about 4 or 5 months ago. I mean, there were certain basic issues going on, like time clocks and people reporting their hours, that, I don't know exactly how many employees work there and what I don't remember the numbers, but I know that there are some very basic business issues going on with reporting that hopefully were fixed, and they're very easy fixes. I'd like to know, I know there was a punch list of numerous items that were presented, and at some point I'd like to have that punch list reviewed, and I'd like to know where we're at, because all we're going to continue to do is without fixing the underlying problem, all we're going to continue to do, I think, is keep throwing money at things. And I would rather fix the problem, and if we still have to throw money at things, I get it, but without fixing the problem, it becomes irritating to me that we continue going through this drill every month, and I'd like an update on where we're at with some of these material issues that hopefully have been fixed, or at least addressed.
Hi, this is Matt from the board. I could respond to that. In terms of the time and attendance, time is being kept at the school level. We are still waiting the outcome of the RFP for payroll services, but we have contracted with the human resource group on the benefit side of the house to get that in order. For the next 90 days, they will provide us full service for a solution. So we are ticking off the checklist, so to speak, that was presented in the HR audit.
That's great. That's good to know.
And then also from the audit standpoint, I'd like to jump in and give some perspective from the board if I could do so at this time.
Yes, please do.
Okay, thank you. So just a little bit of background. The board has operated in this manner since fiscal year 13. The process was approved by 3 different audit firms during this time frame. The process and the blueprint was continued because of the audit approval, but now that this issue has come to light, we have made several significant changes. We have completely revamped our month-end and year-end closing procedures effective immediately. We're introducing a new systematic cutoff procedure. Accounts payable checklists and templates are being created as we speak to track monthly bills. We're doing a cutoff procedure as of the 25th of each month for bills to be paid. If they are unpaid, we will be entering accruals to make sure all our reporting is timely and accurate. This will also be done in year-end, but the year-end procedure will be much more extensive to ensure the accuracy of our books. We are also centralizing the entire billing process. Right now, the board is pretty decentralized when it comes to invoicing, since we have like 11 different locations. Bills will no longer be sent to all 11 locations. Everything will be sent to the central office. It will be up to the accounts payable staff to resolve any bill issues and get approval from manager or building administrators if needed. Right now, it's the opposite. The accounts payable waits for the approval from the managers. And I think I've been in talks with Frank. I'd like to set up monthly meetings with him and his assistant finance director, just to go over the financial statements in real time, to resolve any issues immediately. Like Frank already said, we do have a limited staff down here. I would greatly value an extra set of eyes on the books, their guidance, and to be able to learn from their expertise. And I think most importantly, what the board is doing is we're putting together an action plan to be able to turn back funds to the city's fund balance at the end of fiscal year 20. At the moment, we do see some significant favorability in our budget with employees' benefits, workman's comp, and especially heating for our buildings. Also, we're taking guidance from the State Department of Ed and the governor with the COVID-19 shutdown. We are going through all our service contracts to determine what possible savings there could be due to our building shutdown, while also being extremely sensitive to all our vendors. And I just also want to make a note that the board has an established history of turning back funds to the city if they are unspent. We do not just rush to get to our budget at June 30. Since fiscal year 13, the board has turned back $2.4 million back to the city, and we are committed to do so going forward to establish the fund balance to where it should be.
Thank you very much, Matt. Mr. Filsigno, anything else pertaining to the board's response or corrective action measures?
No, I actually just want to say that I thought I'm actually impressed with what Matt's doing, and I think that's great. He's being exceptionally pragmatic, and I think that's the way to go. Get out ahead of it, see what you can do before it happens, and I think that's great what you're doing, Matt.
Great. Matt, pay attention to the executive orders that came out yesterday from the governor's office. They're all in the area of primarily in Board of Ed expenditures and what expectations for the year. So take a look at that if you probably have already done so.
We already done so. We have been, it's a little off topic, but we've been paying our staff throughout the shutdown. We've been in contact with all our service providers. We're not just going to cut off payment. We understand what's going on and the times. That's why I'm not going to put a number out there and what we possibly may be able to put back. We're still learning of what's going on, but all measures will be done with sensitivity to to the issue, what's going on, to our vendors, to our staff, and most importantly, to the kids of the school system.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. All right, with that, if there is no further discussion pertaining to the fiscal 2019 audit, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Any other remarks or discussion? Okay, Joe, thank you very much for your outstanding work. And to the finance team, thank you for your continued efforts to improve what we saw in this year's report and avoid it going forward. Excellent, and I'm sure you're glad to have the fiscal 2019 audit behind you, because before you know it, you'll be doing fiscal 20. All right. So the next item on the agenda will be the review and discussion of the fiscal 2021 budget. Mayor Rossi, who's on the line, did submit a recommended budget for fiscal 2021 on March 19th. We have provided the recommended budget in detail, as well as an overview of the document in the meeting materials. It is our goal today to provide some initial feedback to the city and to report out to the full MARB regarding the budget proposal. And MARB would provide guidance to the City Council regarding expectations for the adopted budget. Obviously, we have a requirement that we approve the revenue assumptions in this budget. Clearly, it's very difficult to approve a budget without understanding the relationship to the updated 5-year plan. And so therefore, we are asking the city to update its 5-year plan prior to the April subcommittee meeting, with a goal of MARB approval of the budget in May or June. I will say the following, that in light of the current public health crisis, the governor has, by executive order, given towns more flexibility on the timing of the final enactment or approval of the budget. Right now, that flexibility still assumes that requires action by June 30th. So we would need to continue to work within that timeline. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julian, and he'll walk through an overview of the budget that's been presented, and then we'll open it up for any remarks from the city and then questions from the committee members. Thank you.
Okay, well, the materials for the meeting that were distributed earlier this week included both the full recommended budget document and summary review of the proposed budget. And working off of that summary review, you'll see that the overall budget of $165.2 million. It approximates where the city was projecting in its recovery plan. It reflects a budgetary increase of 1.4% year over year. And on the focusing first on the revenue side, see the largest changes in property taxes. The property tax the changes there are a combination of an increase in the grand list and a higher mill rate. So we saw the taxable grand list increase by about 1.3%. And there's an exhibit in the notes that kind of breaks down and attributes some of the additional property taxes to the grand list growth. So the grand list growth generated about 1.3 million in new revenue. And then the increase in the mill rate, which was 0.8 of a mill to the real estate and personal property portion. That generated an additional 1.9 million in property taxes, and that represented a tax rate increase of about 2.2%. The separate mill rate for motor vehicles is held flat. In the second largest source of revenues to the city, which is all forms of state aid, the largest being the ECS or education grant. All sources of state aid make up about 32% of the city's total revenues, about $56.7 million. Again, the largest component of that, in excess of $45 million, is the ECS grant. Overall, state aid is essentially flat from one year to the next. All of those projections are consistent with the state budget that was submitted by the governor in February. And then included among the state aid sources in the city's budget is a line item for municipal restructuring funds, as it has been the last couple of years. The proposed budget relies on $4 million in restructuring funds. It's a slight reduction to what was incorporated into the current year budget, which included $4.1 million. And then looking at the remaining revenue sources, which if you take all of the permits, fines, charges for services, investment income, interfund transfers, all of those in aggregate represent less than 5% of the total budget. The single largest change among those is a reduction in the transfer from the sewer fund for scheduled debt service payments that are sewer related but carried in the general fund. So that reduction is offset by a reduction in the expenditure side of the budget for the related debt service. There are other changes across these categories. There's a reduction in anticipated interest income attributable largely to a lower interest rate environment. There's a number of other adjustments to individual accounts, in many cases bringing them into alignment with prior year actuals. And the budget document itself does provide several years of historical actuals, I believe, from FY16 through FY19. On the expenditure side of the budget, we again see a 1.4% increase reflected in the proposal. That increase includes a set aside of $424,000 as a set aside for fund balance. In the way the budget was assembled, that set aside for fund balance is treated as an expenditure. If you make an adjustment for that, the true expenditures in the budget increased by 1.1%, or about $1.9 million. And looking at some of the individual categories, payroll and personnel costs, the salary accounts rise by $277,000. Most of those are related to additional, or most of that increase, I should say, is related to additional positions that are built into the budget request. There's a table in both the summary, and there's a similar table in the budget document itself that shows the major changes in funded positions and the overall impact on staffing levels. So overall, there were 7 new full-time positions added, and there were 3 that were eliminated for a net increase of 4 full-time positions in the budget. And there were other staffing adjustments made that reflected reassignments or renaming titles and things of that nature, but they're not reflected in this table I'm referring to on page 4 of the summary, which is presenting sort of the major changes staffing-wide. And you'll see that some of those positions are related to issues that have come up before the MARB in different during different discussions. The risk manager that came up as part of the HR consulting group's findings has been included. Position for a benefits coordinator has been included. The city has been making concerted efforts to promote economic development, and has included 2 additional building inspectors. And you'll see that there are some of these positions are offset by eliminations of a couple of full-time positions in the related departments. So we have 2 new assistant building officials, but the elimination of a code enforcement officer, elimination of a payroll clerk and a revenue collection clerk. Again, those apparently done in the context of creating a financial analyst position to provide some additional capacity in the finance department. With employee benefits, one of the major components of that is the health insurance. We're seeing the transition, the impact of the transition to the state partnership plan for city active employees, with essentially the outcome being that we're level funding health insurance in FY21 and have avoided what otherwise would have been a significant increase in health insurance costs there. We talked a little bit about the police pension fund before. The budget for the police pension, it fully funds the ADEC based on the latest valuation report, which is the resulting funding is level funded, more or less with the FY20 budget. The previous valuation did not have as favorable projections, but we may be revisiting some of the investment assumptions going forward. In the non-payroll expenses, you'll see that on page 6 of the handout that some of the larger departmental changes are highlighted there. I'll just mention one now, which is the addition of $170,000 to outsource a range of HR functions. Again, this is another outcome of the HR consulting group's findings and part of the plan there to address the issues that were raised, and we're expecting a detailed implementation plan from the city shortly on that. The debt service, budgeted debt service is essentially flat. It's the net result of reduction in scheduled payments for existing debt, but it also incorporates or layers on a new debt service that would be attributable to a bond issuance tentatively planned for July. There are a series of notes that are expiring now within the next week or so. These are notes that were issued back in the fall to fund ongoing expenses related to the high school renovation project. Those notes are being rolled forward to July, and then the plan, the current plan is that would be permanently financed in July, and that would add about $1.9 million to debt service, but it's offset by reductions in the existing debt that's out there. In the education budget, the city has level funded education at $89.96 million. This has been level funded for a couple of years now. The Board of Ed in their budget proposal did include some increases and represented that those increases could be covered by additional anticipated funding through the ECS Alliance grant. The drivers on the expenditure, or the drivers for the education budget, are outlined in the handout and also in the budget document that they had provided previously. But nevertheless, the city's general fund contribution to education is held flat at $89.96 million. In the contingency account, which is a large list of items in the city budget, the single largest change is the elimination of the placeholder for efficiencies, which was budgeted as a negative expense in the current year budget of negative $1.25 million. That negative placeholder has been eliminated, and any savings attributable to the transition to the partnership plan or as a result of the energy purchase program, any additional revenues anticipated as a result of adjusting fees, all of those changes have now been incorporated into their respective line item in the revenue and expense categories. Also just pointing out that the true contingency in the city budget is a relatively low figure. of just $370,000. And then the final category being capital funding, at least in the general fund, is a minimal change from year to year compared to last year. The specific projects that are being requested for funding or proposed for funding through the capital transfer to capital reserve is included in the actual budget document on page 121. And then turning just briefly to the Allentown Fire Fund, just a couple of highlights there. The proposal for the fire fund keeps the mill rate level with the current fiscal year. The budget does recognize a significant grant from the state for the motor vehicle transition grant. It's $900,000 that the city did not receive in the current year, and the city has essentially proposed directing an equivalent amount in their budget on the expenditure side towards capital reserve and towards funding the pension liability above and beyond the required ADEC amount. So I'll conclude my comments there and turn it back to the secretary.
Great. Thank you, Julian. Your summaries are outstanding as always. Before we open it up for discussions, I just wanted to respectfully give Mayor Rossi an opportunity. This is your budget that you presented and recommended to your council. Do you have any remarks, Mayor, that you'd like to make about the budget that you have put before the board? And just a reminder, it's *6 to unmute yourself, Mayor.
Now, can you hear me?
You're a little low, so if you can speak up a little higher, that would be great.
No, can I just come and talk over here? I'm going to be brief. So is that there? I'm going to talk from over here. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
All right.
No, I just wanted, first off, to thank you, Secretary, and also Kim Tennyson, and Julian, and and all the MARB members, especially with the help that we are getting from, with the $1 million from what went on with the audit. The City of West Haven gratefully appreciates that, and I want to thank you, and for the help and support and partnership that Kim and Julian and your staff have given us through this difficult time. So it is greatly appreciated. As far as the budget, we have tried very hard. I've worked very closely with Frank to keep it in the 5-year plan. There have been changes, but not major changes. And we've tried to make sure that we have sufficiently funded what we need to do with HR and payroll, and putting some much necessary staff improvements as well. It is a balanced budget. With the mill rate, as I said, and the grand list together equal the tax revenues, and it does go with it mirrors the tax revenues that were figured in the 5-year plan. So right now we have continued our time schedule on time, even though we did gratefully appreciate the extension if we needed it. But I've already turned it over to the City Council. We will be having a virtual public hearing tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. And we have asked the public to send in emails or letters if they don't have emails to give public comment on the recommended budget. So again, I look forward to getting through this budget process with the City Council and with MARB, and we're trying our absolute best to do, what has been recommended to us, because we realized, again, that these departments, HR and payroll specifically, needed a lot of shoring up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Rossi. With that, I'd like to open it up for discussion, questions, and comments pertaining to the fiscal 21 budget for West Haven.
This is Bob White. I'd like to emphasize what the Secretary said about the relationship between this budget and a 5-year plan. We kind of rushed approval of the last plan, which was pretty late in January. I think you look at a budget in terms of how that advances the ball of having West Haven get to where they said they need to be. And just to put a little context in that, based on the plan that was approved, that in FY23, 2 years from now, West Haven will be have a balanced budget without MARB funds. The bogeys are 168 in revenue and 164 in expenses, and a fund balance of 8.5, which is 5.23%. You've just taken a body blow with the prior period adjustment on the grant fund, and I sort of really looking at how you intend to get from where you are today to that bogey in 2023. On the revenue side, it seemed like it's based on some grand list growth based on the reval in 2020. Question, given the current situation, what impact will that have on the reval and the prices, and the valuations of properties? Number two, the mill rates are supposed to be going up. That's as we've discussed before, that's a hard swallow, especially in these times. And I'd really like to see a plan on how that's going to be done. I do notice that in this budget, you reduced by about 0.4 mills, the proposed mill rate, on the basis that the grand list is a little higher. I just think you need to think through how you're going to get there in 2023. On the expenditure side, quite frankly, the big thing is the dropping off of $4 million in debt service in 2023. I don't know what the savings are. There's supposed to be $1.2 million in savings going forward. A question, Julian, you said that the revenues were about where they were predicted in the plan. I'm looking at the plan, and it was revenues forecast for 2021 of 161 million. This is 165. That's a good discrepancy, but I don't understand it. But bottom line is, I'd really like to have us spend a lot of time on the 5-year plan and the method that the city is going to use to get there in 2 years. Okay, that this is not a year-by-year thing, and we hit our bogeys for the year for the most part. I think we've got to look at some long-term trends, because the city has worked very hard to get here. I just like to see them get to where they need to be, where they say they need to be, and we've kind of agreed, because there are things that are happening that are not favorable. So anyway, that's my piece.
So this is Secretary McCloud. I want to really echo the remarks of Bob White. I think you framed the work that we jointly, the board, the subcommittee, the board, and the town have to do it. And it really is ultimately about the end game that you, Mayor, under your leadership and with your team and with your council are trying to achieve for the city of West Haven and the residents and taxpayers. And so it is easy to look at this on a year-by-year basis, and when there's some favorability, such as the grand list growth or some lower expenses, to say, that helps me with some of those tough choices that I had previously committed to. But I do think that has to be examined further, because if you only have a 2-year time frame, that might not be the most prudent course, because it puts a lot of pressure on fiscal 22. And obviously, we don't know what kind of economic climate we'll be in, and so there could be some other surprises. So I'm only going to note this, and I'm not drawing a conclusion, because you're going to put together a 5-year plan. But I'm looking at the plan that is dated February 5th, 2020. The revenues that were approved by the MARB and by your council and what was submitted were revenues of $162.4 million and included the municipal restructuring funds. That plan did assume a 1.85 mill rate increase, going from 36.68 to 38.53. I see here in the plan that mill rate increase has been reduced to 0.8 mills, and the municipal restructuring funds have been maintained at $4 million. And I just flag that as, that is a recommended decision that you've made in your budget. But if we really have the long game in mind, and you think about where ultimately we collectively have established that the city needs to be in 2 years, delaying some of those actions just make it harder for you in the following year. And so I agree wholeheartedly with Bob that an updated plan that does not move the end goal timeframe, but keeps the timeframe at getting yourselves to sustainability by fiscal 2023. We need to see how you plan to do that if the idea is to put off, if you will, some of the commitments that were originally made in the plan. So for me, I need to see the other side in order to have a better sense of what my position would be on what you've submitted. I will say the following as well, that obviously we're in a very difficult climate with COVID, and those decisions have to be measured by the impact of increases on residents at a time when people are losing jobs, and we don't know whether the economy will go into an economic downturn. So I certainly respect that there are other factors that will have to come into play ultimately in the final decision. Any other questions or discussion? And certainly, as City of West Haven Mayor, if anyone wants to respond, you're more than welcome to do so.
May I speak? This is Frank.
Yes, sir.
Just a couple things of note is that I am currently working on the 5-year plan. My personal goal is, and I've spoken to Julian about this, is to have something to the mayor next week and a preliminary document to Julian and Kim next week with regards to some of the other things that were brought up. I think you'll see that from the revenue side, I think past practice in the city was to look at 1 year of history and the budget and determine that's what the budget for the next year would be. With the help of Michael Milone and the new layout in the budget document, some of those revenue line items you'll note are higher than the 5-year plan because they just had not been changed in years to reflect current levels of activity. That being said, we did realize that we did commit a certain tax revenue within the 5-year plan. And as we had mentioned at the last full MARB that we were at, the increase in the mill rate would to generate the same revenues, the increase in the grand list rather, increase the same revenues at 0.8 versus the 1.13. So that .8 mils and the tax revenues associated with that is what's built into the budget, and that's driving part of that revenue increase. We were not comfortable going back to the MARB after last year's discussions, coming off of what we had already committed to from a tax revenue basis.
Thank you, Frank. Agreed. I think you used sound revenue trending and truing up, if you will, of the base to create more realistic revenue targets for each of your revenue types. And I would acknowledge progress, if you will, with honoring the level of revenues in general that were in that plan. I would just say to the city that, reiterate what Bob has stated, and that is, now we've said I've tied to the plan in that particular year, and now we want you to think about, look, you were going to have to do some other things to get yourself further along. We're very happy that grand list growth contributed, if you will, to some of those measures and made it a little easier. As you think about the multi-year plan, you have to weigh whether it is easier to go a little bit beyond what's in fiscal 21 to get you closer to that end game, and particularly in light of the fact that your fund balance is much lower than we originally anticipated. It's easy to look at the budget and say we got there, but you're a little couple steps back now in fund balance, and we know that a healthy organization or a healthy city it also requires some extent of adequate reserves, or you're just teeter-tottering on the brink in the event that you have any surprises. So I think we're going to have an opportunity to explore that further when you submit your plan, your updated plan to the board. I encourage you to be thinking along that longer term, through that longer term lens, if you will, which I don't really consider it long term when it's 2 years. To me, that's short term. But I look through that short term lens about that end goal in terms of fiscal sustainability that we had committed to getting West Haven to. And it's not just from a budget perspective, but it's from a fund balance perspective, and the extent to which this budget submission is adequate enough to account for some of those changes that we learned about in the financials. I'd think about that as you finalize the five-year plan. But thank you very much for your remarks.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions or recommendations to West Haven pertaining to the draft budget, the recommended budget that is before us for review?
Yes, Melissa. It's Kim Tennyson.
Hi, Kim.
Hi. I just wanted to piggyback off of your comments on the fiscal sustainability as well as the fund balance perspective for them to move forward. I just do not want to lose sight of, yes, we might make the numbers and we might make the targets, but if you do not have the right people and the proper infrastructure underneath, it will crumble again. So we don't want this to be a short-term fix, that we have an overall infrastructure that still needs a lot of attention. And it could easily cause them to fall back into fiscal challenges if, again, the payroll HR part, the software with the munis system, the separation of duties, and all of the findings that are there. So it's a much bigger issue than just finances too. So a heavy lift here. Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you, Kim. Great point. We're making progress. I will say we are making progress, but I do agree. You're right. It's the financial audit, it's the internal controls, and the operations that we are, trying to strengthen and solidify. So that's excellent to know. I appreciate that. Any other subcommittee members? Okay. So with that, Frank, do you have a timeline as to when you will be submitting the updated 5-year plan?
Yeah, as I stated, I'm trying to get it completed by middle of next week. I think I've tackled the two easier pieces, Allentown and the sewer fund. Those are behind me. I'm currently working on the model for the general fund, trying to update the 19 actuals as well as the fiscal 20 projections. We're layering in all of the healthcare assumptions based on the current year and then a go-forward projection. One thing that we do have that we didn't have last year is an extremely detailed capital needs, 5-year capital needs from all of the department heads. So you'll see that in your full budget document. I believe it starts on page 122, and they have given me 122. They have given me a full breakdown of every vehicle that needs to be replaced, every major building or infrastructure issue that needs to be replaced or repaired. Using that, we're able to determine much cleaner debt service numbers that we can put into the 5-year plan. The goal that I have is, with very few exceptions, to stick with this timing of replacing specific vehicles. We are going to replace every year. The goal is to replace 6 police vehicles. Within the city, what happens is those vehicles that get replaced and pulled off of the police front line get turned over to the city for city officials to use. So by doing that on a timely basis and a regular basis, we won't need to go out and fund replacement of city vehicles. So all of that being said, the model is in the works right now. I was working on it this morning before joining this call. I'll spend the rest of the week working on it. And again, the goal is to have something that we can pressure test by the middle of next week.
Very good. Thank you very much, Frank. And Frank, I just want to commend you and the team for the work that you are doing and the quality products that you're putting before the board and the subcommittee. We're very thankful for your leadership, and Mayor, we're thankful for your continued attention, and we'll continue to work collaboratively. So that puts us in a position where we will be able to, one, update the full board on our light review, if you will, of the recommended budget for fiscal 2021. And when we enter into our next West Haven subcommittee meeting in April, we'll have an opportunity to review the fiscal 21 budget in relationship to the updated 5-year plan, at which time the subcommittee can consider action to propose to the full MARB if we're ready to do so, and we'd be able to therefore approve a budget in May or June. We will obviously continue to have conversation about the expected action of the council on the 5-year plan, as well, consistent with last year. So with that, I have nothing further. Is there any other business? Great. Thank you all. I will ask if there's a motion to adjourn. Any of our subcommittee members want to support a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion. Steve Feldman.
And Christine Shaw, second.
Thank you very much. It's been motioned. It's been seconded. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you all for your commitment and leadership. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary.